first seminar of BVE North. We're very pleased to be the proud owners of this. So just to remind you, in case you're in the wrong place, we're at a seminar called in Building Low-Cost Automated Asset Metadata Capture into Production and Delivery to Monetize Content on the Second Screen.
God, are we?
Hands up if you're in the right place.
I'm not.
Well done. Okay. Oh, yeah, we're probably the most unlikely people, yes. Well, great. I mean, the title is incredibly broad, and, you know, there's immediately very narrow thinking on that. We all think about commercials and that iPad and that relationship to the TV, etc. But there's lots of questions in relation to that, which we're going to debate and converse over now. But there's sort of question marks we need to add right at the beginning. First of all, we probably need to redefine what is the first TV, what is the first monitor. Where is the first monitor going on? We're looking in the world of video on demand. You know, where do we watch live TV? What is the element of that consumer TV set in the household? And what is the relationship to that second monitor? But then we also bring in the question of monetize. What is the financial benefit of that second monitor? Where does that work? Is it commercial? Is it extra features that actually relate to the programming? These are the things we want to talk about. And then obviously the key element, metadata. And we all know the key to success with metadata is we need to capture it once and once only. And we all recognize the best way of capturing metadata is right at the head, because it has to flow for our whole systems as we go through those points. So very pleased to say, so I'm John Harris, I'm from Route 6. We specialize in workflow solutions and systems integrations. I'm very pleased to have our technical director from the farm, David Klavowski, and we have Steve Sharman, who is the CTO of MediaSmiths, equally involved in live productions, post-productions, and designing asset management systems out there. And what I'd like to do first of all is I'm going to hand you over to Dave, who's going to air his views. How'd you go, Dave?
Well, I think John summed it up right at the beginning. Is the most important thing about metadata capture is that it can't cost anything to acquire it. It has to be done right at the beginning, and it has to then maintain its stickiness to your content all the way through to delivery. How you monetize that, I don't think anybody's really sure yet. But unless you have that data and you are aware where that data is to, shall we say, harvest it or to use it in a commercial venture, there isn't. You can't reapply it unless at a later date. So how we do that and how we get that minimum metadata set, specify that minimum metadata set, it's actually beyond me why it hasn't already started happening. I mean, with an iPhone, when you take a photograph with an iPhone, it tags your photo for you to see where you have taken that photo. Now, if we could do that with production and it stays stuck to that shot all the way through to its final delivery into content, that has to have a value. It just feels like it has to have a value. Even if it is a wildlife documentary and you're watching it on a computer, not in a traditional broadcast environment, you're watching it on your iPad or on your screen, and you go, where's that? Have I been there? Even if it's just to settle an argument, you click the screen, and then up comes this information, and then there's an Expedia, somebody trying to sell you a flight to it or whatever. Now that, to apply that information after the fact would be too expensive, because the value of that is absolute pence. But if it could be made available as the metadata pack for that when program is transmitted, just because it's followed the asset all the way through post-production, all the way from acquisition all the way through to post-production, that has to be the solution. Now, how we do that is probably something that Steve and John's organisation, because currently, it would be quite difficult to track that through. Now, if you look at the work that the DPP are doing with the minimum metadata set that lives with the AS11 file that's going to be delivered, that is quite interesting, but it doesn't necessarily have enough metadata fields to travel that. Now, if you presented that to a production company now, they'd go, oh my God, we can't do that. That can't be the minimum set. You know, it can't appear as a minimum rule. But what it ought to be is that we just apply that information because we've got it, because it's come through with the shot, and it just doesn't disappear. Now, it seems so simple, and yet it's actually not a very simple thing to solve.
No, it's not. I mean, it does make you wonder whether we're actually starting from the correct premise, which is, I think, inherently, probably all three of us, probably most of the people in the audience would think there is an inherent value to metadata, but we have no proof point for that. So it does kind of make you wonder that are we there is. I'm sure. I mean, both of you work in the same industry I do, and I think what we're seeing don't you think there's a little bit of a backlash going on just at the moment, and probably has been for a while, which is all that tapeless stuff, and all that file-based workflow stuff. Well, you said it was going to be quicker and cheaper and easier to use and all that stuff. Well, it's not really, is it?
It's more complicated, and there's more of it, and it's harder.
Yeah. So
and by adding another minimum data set to a requirement,
exactly.
would just be. So this is what I think the point is. In order for it ever to be monetized, this process has to be painless in its absolute extent.
I think
so it ought to be that it's just tagged. You have even if it's just that GPS tagging of the moment of acquisition.
And there's another, and I think that has to be backed up by something else, which is while we don't understand the value of metadata, because you can look at different metadata sets. You can look at the metadata sets that we capture during production. You can look at the technical metadata sets that we have to supply as part of program delivery, and that's almost forced on us by circumstance. Yeah. And then you start to look at the area of value that may come because you can find things and have things recommended to you. And there's kind of a question at the moment, which is there's certainly some degree of value to there. So if you do some analysis on something like Amazon, then they would say the metadata they actually capture from the readership trends and the purchasing trends is very valuable to them, because it allows them to do side by side recommendations. And whilst that might be that somebody may only click on something because it's recommended, once every 10,000 tries. Given the volume of data that's coming through, that's going to be quite lucrative to them.
That's a really interesting concept in a non-broadcast world, which we are going to get to. There's no doubt that unless it's a live program, it's not necessarily going to be broadcast. It will just be available, and it might be available from a particular time. If you happen to be watching and you happen to think they know that your server knows that you have a penchant for Amazon rainforests. It will then recommend, oh look, you might, if you like this Amazon rainforest, you might like all these Amazon rainforests.
Exactly. So
and then it's an added value. It's not a sales thing. It's just an added value.
Exactly. Exactly as you said before, we capture that data set, we carry it through, and it becomes part of the corpus, which allows you to kind of recommend and do e-commerce. But I mean, it's one of these things that it has to be almost zero cost to capture, because we don't know what the value is. But also, I wonder if we kind of almost need to step back into some of the things that we've been doing forever, which is wouldn't there be a lot of inherent value in metadata if, for example, we could get it to get EPGs to work correctly and get the interaction between EPGs and recommendation services and so on to people? Because I don't know about you, I never have time to watch telly, but the reality is there's a lot of good stuff on, and we actually sat and watched something on Friday night on iPlayer. Which was
still the telly, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Well, actually, it is, because
is that second screen though? It's a question.
I tend to use iPlayer off the PS3, so I can actually watch telly on the telly as opposed to like that. But the reality is that I didn't get it from the EPG or a program recommendation service. I happened to see a tweet that said, "Oh, there's this. While you were watching Twitter, there's this really good thing about Jets on BBC Two." So I had to finish what I was doing and then watch it on iPlayer. But that's the kind of thing which has some. It has value for me as a consumer.
So that's a recommendation.
Again,
it's really got nothing to do with metadata, has it? So
well, it does, because if you think about it, it's how else is it going to, unless we actually capture that metadata and start to apply it in a certain way? It's the only thing we've got, unless we go back to having armies of people saying, you know what, you probably like that, wouldn't you?
Yeah, it's quite interesting. You use the expression zero cost, and this seminar was titled low cost, and I think probably what we've just realised is the metadata capture needs to be zero cost, not low cost. It has to be something that is just inherent with the nature of what we do.
So I think that there's quite a lot of interesting sort of statements on that. I mean, first of all, we're touting around the phrase metadata, which is probably something we didn't throw around, 7-8 years ago. And it's very interesting. 7 years ago, we started on a process of delivering file-based acquisition workflow solutions for want of a better name.
You say that
And
again.
it took 7 years, really, before I actually truly felt that our community really picked up that technology. And I'll say we've just really grasped that process now. We're now about to enter the cloud in a very big way, and we're going to see a major acceleration. And I predict we're going to be actively working within the cloud within the next 3 years in a big way, in the same way that we did file-based acquisition. So we're going to start seeing that acceleration. And the key to all of this is metadata.
I still want the hardware. In this, we were talking earlier about the idea that if I'm delivering a show up until whatever this transmission point is, and if my hardware and that media isn't in the same building that I'm in working on it, I will be very nervous. Because anyone can dig through a cable.
Oh,
but
you are
anyone can dig through a cable,
but you're right.
But we also have 1,000 TV stations in the UK now. How do we deal with that commoditization of programming going on? But I don't want to sort of digress from our target. And I was sort of interested in metadata, and you mentioned one thing in regards to tagging. So what is metadata? And who is responsible for that metadata? We do a lot of elements. We did a big project for Reuters News where we had a Rolodex. I remember those? You just rolling around, and that was their database for all of their archive library. And we could scan that, but actually the most useful information in that Rolodex were the hand-scribbled notes and the people in that. So if we're doing tagging in a technical production, clearly we have cameras now that can do sidecar XML files, we can have GPS login, all of that technology there. But I think what that does, it leads us to a tag. So then does that link us to Google? Is Google become our metadata search? Because we also have to think about metadata as a personal experience, a social experience. There are great examples. Red in Europe is a danger zone. Red in the Far East is welcome, it's luck. So how do we bring that mindset meta and how do we link to it?
Well,
Who is responsible for that?
Most importantly is how you keep that metadata attached to the content. Yes. I mean, it's in post-production prior to, or in an entry into a post-production channel, that metadata is there. It very quickly disappears when you even on any edit platform. I'm not so familiar with the Adobe stuff at the moment, but on all the edit platforms that we're using, it very definitely disappears. I mean, it's hard enough keeping track of its relative audio. Yes. let alone this little bit of metadata.
Our tools are not designed for it.
Yeah.
And I mean, I think you congratulations on the buzzword Bollocksology. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
So I'll add another one, which is big data, because you're right. I think with what we're starting to get with metadata is that even when we do start using, say, iPhone apps and camera sidecars and all the things that the production tools add in, you've got to have somewhere to maintain that stuff. And it gets to a scale where you're adding so much information in, particularly if you start to go for these automatic harvesting tools, which look at the video to a certain extent, look at the audio to a certain extent. They just churn out stuff. And they churn out so much stuff that the only way that you can realistically start to trend it and analyze it and do things with it is to start having big data stores and algorithms that work on it for you.
Well, it's interesting you saw about that's the automatic harvesting, which a lot of these companies are doing, the character recognition and all that kind of stuff. I just don't believe there's a value in that. I think it needs to be applied metadata. That it's just applied in production that just maintains it, like you said about the handwritten notes and the Rolodex. Yeah. They are much more valuable. And you made a comment earlier, which none of you heard, but we're here about, which is the real value of content comes from the production team on season 2, season 3. They remember that there was a shot that we used 3 years ago, and that shot will work perfectly here. Now, it will work in the same show. It's not going to work in another show. And I think people are slowly realizing that these deep archives, the value is very minimal. Yeah. So it's certainly not worth a massive cost to log it and archive
absolutely. So deep footage archives. Yeah. I think that certainly something that we've found as we go around, as we've been around the industry and looking at different broadcasters, is attitudes have changed really over the past 2 or 3 years as people have realised just how expensive and how difficult it is to capture and maintain this stuff. Because we did a piece of work for an overseas broadcaster about a year or so ago, and it was in children's. And what they actually found was that they'd started a big project to look at metadata tagging and asset management and all the kind of stuff that we'd say have to be within a kind of an automated broadcast an efficient broadcast workflow. And what they actually said was, well, you know what, lads, the problem is that people who are editing, because children's is so low cost in this country, the people who are actually making use of this footage and this information are the same people that went out and shot it. So what's the point in them tagging a whole bunch of stuff for a bunch of stuff that they'll remember anyway? They've got a couple of notepads for doing it. So we have to be. There potentially is a case for doing some of this stuff, but we have to possibly get a lot more selective, or we go back to the zero costing again.
I think you can either again back down to applying a value to metadata.
Yeah.
There is metadata which has a value to a production because you just remember that, or when somebody moves off a production, it would be quite useful if there was a database rather than just a pile of handwritten notes.
Yes.
Sometimes could be useful, but that's different from getting a value from it from, let's call it the second screen or just the screen, because second screen is becoming a little, as you made the comment, what is the second screen? Second screen is probably just not broadcast television. So, I mean, in that sense, that's probably all it is. It's not two screens at the same time. It's just, you're consuming it in a different way.
And arguably, if you're looking at something which is, until we get to the point of kind of ubiquity of second screen, where the cost of producing for the second screen is as cheap, or as seen as equally high value as the first. Doesn't the second screen need as much production and narration and forgotten the word and looking after as much as the kind of first screen experience for high value content?
And is there did the economics work? There's a very something we were talking about last night is there is a very clever EVS application that allows, if you're using EVS as a slow-mo device in a production environment, it will publish all your available slow-mos to a web server whilst the show's on air. Now, I don't know anybody who's using that in the UK. It's probably a rights issue and everything else. But to me, that is probably one of the most elegant second screen application I've ever heard of. You're watching you're watching a game. You've got access to all the slow-mos that the production director's got in the gallery, and you go, okay, I'd like to see that from that angle. I'd like to see from that, and you watch it on your iPad, not on your screen. Now, for me, that is a fantastic added value.
Absolutely.
Now, I assume there's a rights issue. There's absolutely no reason, and it's such a simple idea. Now, is that metadata? That's added value.
Yes.
And that stuff
absolutely.
And you could remove it immediately from the server once the game's finished. So it's not like an ongoing access. It just disappears from the web.
But it's an area where if you think about it, it's an area where you've got a natural fan base, and you've also got it's an area where actually adding automatic. I mean, you look at what the BBC did with the Olympics app, and taking all of that kind of metadata that they're collecting on site plus the external feed and putting together into something which was a massive in-depth experience.
It was a wonderful. That was a wonderful. How that. Here's to hoping they can do it with the Commonwealth.
Yeah, absolutely.
It was a wonderful thing. And sadly, their thunder was stolen a little bit by Sky, wasn't it? In a really annoying way, because it was supposed to be it was only ever going to be that app, and it was a real shame. Well, not shame, brilliant for everybody else who was watching it in HD, but the fact that all that media didn't just get delivered on the second screen that was just a great achievement.
Yeah, exactly.
Great achievement.
So I think one of the things interesting is obviously metadata, no matter, has to start right at the beginning of production, and there are disciplines that have been re-engaged at production level. Today, primarily production metadata is designed to make post-production efficient. And actually what we need to think is, well, I'm here on a shoot. How do I want to produce this program? It's not just about the program. It's about monetizing my archive. Okay, I'm here. There's potential and opportunity to shoot other material and documenting that at the same time. There's obviously, how else am I going to use my production? It's a second screen, etc. But we need to take charge of that right at the shoot and make sure that metadata then follows on with that in mind, rather than just thinking of that program.
Fills me with dread, the thought of trying to get people to do that. They're really focused on their job in hand, and to think beyond their job in hand, that's a big ask. It needs to sort some of it.
Just spent a lot of time actually kind of ripping people who possibly would have done part of that out of the budget.
Yes,
because that's the other thing. Is to me, that's one of the other big things about metadata capture is how on earth can you write a line item for that into a program budget? Because that's the first thing someone's going to strip out.
We don't need that.
Yeah.
Again, it's always a business case, isn't it? And I think once you can see the business model for doing it, then you can justify the front end cost.
I think what we said right at the beginning is there isn't a business case yet.
Yeah.
And there won't be a business case until that data is available. At that point, there will be a business case, and it has to be specific. It can't be harvested. These companies that are doing this automatic harvesting, I think it's just too much information. It needs to be sort of.
Yeah. Well, let's ask the audience. Does anyone actually generate production metadata at their shoot in their production at the moment? Are people using products like XM Pilot for the Sony XD Cam? People aware of that as a product?
Very clever.
where you can have a Wi-Fi connection to your camera on a. Okay. Mm.
Yeah.
They got an XM pilot, and
Yeah.
I said, so did you put the metadata on when you went out and shot a piece? And he went, well, I started it. He said, I put GV of court. And said, then I got busy, and every shot after that was GV of court because there just isn't the time to go there, imprint every shot. And I don't do news anymore, but I still don't have time to put that in. If it's a GPS tagging system on it, that's great.
Yeah.
But for someone to actually physically put that data in, I just think
I agree.
we're miles away from that.
Yeah.
We really are.
Yeah,
and doing it after the fact, the concept of logging, it's only people will only log either if there is a junior on the production who you can just persuade to do it.
Yeah.
It's certainly never going to happen back in the hotel room when you finish shooting, is it?
No.
Because you're just tired. And so
Well,
the
you're
reality
too busy uploading all your footage.
yeah, too busy moving your media
Yeah.
off a card to whatever it is.
This is it.
And it's really it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because no matter how you look at it, you can see there must be a value in this, but we haven't got there yet, and there will never be a value in it until the information is there.
Yeah.
So it's almost like this the classic catch-22 situation.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's not too bad because we got our own edits, and then an editor go, "Oh, I need a shot of that," and I'll go, "Oh, I did that 2 years ago," like you were saying.
Because
and
that's
that
just
absolutely happens.
that's just our inbuilt
Yeah.
database, not
right.
any built database. That's just
right,
it's our own one, you know.
Yeah, so it's very difficult to move that next step.
Yeah.
So probably the key then is tagging elements. The GPS is actually quite critical. I mean, that can travel around very easily today.
I don't know. I still don't know one production that has ever travelled that through, and I don't know a post-production device that will allow that data to just travel. And there's absolutely no reason why it can't. I mean, we've got a digital file. Even if we transcode it, that watermark, for want of a better word, could just stay with it. Now, you might in a production not want that to be, because if you're tricking something and saying actually it was this angle, suddenly, because that does happen in television, honest.
Really? Surely?
Yeah. We make it up sometimes, maybe there is an embarrassment if we started just that a watermark stays with a shot all the way through post, and you might go, actually no, I don't want them to know that was not Paris. It was actually Oldham.
Do we have any camera manufacturers in the audience at all? Probably not. Okay. I mean, that's obviously going to be the key to that area and bring that in. And I think also linking that tag into the web databases and having the algorithms to relate that information is going to be very critical to us. But clearly, generating that metadata is a post-production or post-event that needs to be automated somehow, linked into the whole thing.
I think that's looking at the this feels to me like one of the areas where we're asking the kind of, if what we term the kind of traditional vendors, like the camera manufacturers, is probably the wrong way to go, because naturally we think it should be, but you look at cameras where people, you say, okay, so enter metadata on your camera, right? Okay, so I'll take it off my shoulder and then I'll do. Oh, now I've got an A, and now I've got a Q, and now I've got it just doesn't work. So the GPS attachment is brilliant, but it's attached to the camera, and it's very, very expensive, and it's ruggedized, and it's all the same. It's all the stuff that you expect from a very, very expensive camera manufacturer. So you've got to ask the question: isn't it possibly easier just to have a dedicated one of those, which you put in your pocket, you press the button at the start of the day, and you just forget about it. And yes, it will generate a whole bunch of complete rubbish, but that's what computers are actually quite good at, taking the right data points out of a piece of rubbish. Maybe if you train them how to do it.
Maybe if you had something like that and you just had a text to speak, and as you know, it's getting. On an iPhone, Siri is getting better. There's no doubt it's getting better. Yeah. And it is, and the Windows recognition is getting better. There's absolutely no reason why that couldn't be either built into a camera or, as you say, you just have it with you. So when you're out shooting, you just say what it is.
Yeah. And
you say what it is, and it tags it. And you will always be in a position to say what it is you're shooting. Yeah. So maybe that is actually there. We've done it. We've cracked it. We can all go.
But when you take it back,
It's like a slate.
somebody does have to take a bit of a step into the unknown and spend some money on it, because even when you collate that data, and you might have a UUID in the footage to link it back, somebody's got to do a database or a data model and link it together, and maybe do some panels to put into Adobe or an Avid environment. So it's not a zero cost. It's something.
You need to
it's
see
an investment
it,
thing.
You need to see what was embedded on that
of course
shot,
you do.
just so that it wasn't somebody saying something something inappropriate or some text that's inappropriate.
Well, I think in technology terms, we don't really have the technology. They can recognise an image in the way that we view an image.
No.
They can probably recognise buildings, they can recognise wildlife.
Yeah, I think
very limited.
I think auto tracking. You have the data overload. It has to be disseminated information.
Auto's got some value, but in certain situations. I mean, I used to work for IBM, and we spent a lot of time trying to sell an enormously expensive image recognition system to the BBC, and didn't. But one of the key problems that we actually had was that this thing was actually very good at news footage. It was very good at analysing things and detecting explosions and different events like that. But the only way that we could actually get the guys that owned the technology to start to integrate it into media systems was to start to pay them. And when they were being paid sort of $100 million a year by the US government to incorporate it into battlefield systems, it's kind of we could maybe give you 20 grand. It's kind of it's never going to happen.
Yes.
So I suspect there is some useful pattern recognition technology out there that we kind of probably suspect exists, don't know about, but it will eventually trickle down
in the same way as the Quantel's tracking software was not developed for television.
No.
It was nothing to do, that pixel tracking code was written for guidance systems.
Absolutely.
There was a whole floor in Quantel's office.
Well,
remember that you weren't allowed on. Had nothing to do with television.
Yeah, but it will come down to us eventually. But I tend to agree that the current generation of automated recognition. I think some of the stuff that Adobe have built in on the into Premiere on the script and that's quite clever.
All our
it's
edits,
quite good.
Interestingly, in Formula A, every single edit runs script sync.
Yeah.
So they do a script sync of everything. They take an auto track.
Yeah, and that's clever and potentially useful. Yeah.
It hasn't. It just so for that transcribing service, nobody does it yet here, and nobody runs that plugin yet on an Avid now. I don't know whether that's just because their production methodology is slightly different and they're obsessive transcribers. I mean, they like to have a transcript of everything.
I'm certainly in the States, in the big episodics, they run their entire edit from the script.
Yeah, no, but they shoot reality. They do a transcription.
Yeah.
And it used to be that they went off to a transcribers. Now they just run script sync on the top of it, and it just does a keyword text. And they just say they run that, and that plugin runs in most of our edit suites over there, and not one in the UK.
Absolutely, but again, it's one of these things where actually you probably need to do a little bit of exploration in order to make it worth something. So, one of the we did a piece of work a couple of years ago where one of the big kind of hidden elephants of the industry, just the amount of storage that you need to have to keep stuff around, he's into view because just one factual department in one location for one broadcaster is generating half a petabyte of new material every 6 months, and they have to keep most of it around for because it is factual, and therefore if you get a compliance issue, you need to be able to refer back. But if
Who
you
pays
had
for that?
well, precisely,
the post house,
another issue.
Yeah.
But if you've actually got clever software which is recognising what's going on, perhaps you can afford to put that somewhere that's not quite so expensive.
Yeah.
And actually save some money that way.
Cool. So I think with Lean, obviously, the reality is we need to understand the business model before we can start applying the disciplines and technology of metadata tagging to lead us forward. Obviously, our conversation is about the second screen, and I saw it opened up. We actually almost have to start questioning what our first screen is at the moment. But what do we think the second screen is? What does it mean to us at this moment in time?
I personally think the second screen is the consumption of something that isn't in a broadcast environment. So it may not necessarily be lean forward. It's not just lean forward. I watch the way my son watches TV now, and he probably doesn't, unless it's live sport that he really wants to watch live, he invariably time shifts everything. So he's either watching it when he wants to watch it, or he's watching multiple things. He's got something on the TV, and he's got an iPad, and he's watching something here almost at the same time. Now, is I think when you're choosing to watch iPlayer or time shifted, it's probably second screen, even though it's
That's good. That's a good
and
viewpoint.
because it's a file that's being relayed to you, you're watching it via a computer. So therefore, if there was metadata in there, your smart set could pull up some of that added information. Now, when it's being broadcast live, you then get into what was a few years ago, the second screen, is that's something that's synchronizing with your main broadcast, that's running some other information alongside it. And I've seen some very clever applications that they do it. Whether any of them have any monetary value other than the EVS thing I was talking about. So the second screen is I think second screen is not the broadcast screen.
Yeah.
And that is thinning out. You know, there's what is that? Is that does anybody was the X Factor or the Strictly final? Was Bake Off finals live? Did people? A lot of people watched it, but did they watch it when it was actually on, or did most people watch it via iPlayer? I don't know. Don't know. I can't tell you what to say.
Well,
that's your second screen. You've got it in your
Well, the
hand.
second screen, and but what is it? I mean, we talked about, is it just added features towards that program? Is it a commercial reality where we can sit there and say, well, I like the jacket they're wearing, I want to buy that? Because that technology is all available. Where do we really see that second screen growing as a commercial value?
I think it's probably the best one to answer whether that I like that jacket. You know, can I buy it? I've seen that. People have been touting that around for years.
Yeah.
Has anybody ever made that fiscally work for them yet?
Not that I know of. I think I think the reality is if any of the three of us knew the secret to what second screen was going to be, we'd actually be out there making money on it as opposed to be sat here talking about it. I think it's a real difficult one because we're in that period of clearly everybody's experimenting with different things and there's a real difficult blend because you're right. People do. I mean, I tend to actually kind of think you're both right. Second screen to me is kind of almost second viewing. It's a different place other than the kind of live telly to watch thing. But at the same time, it's the companion. And it's kind of interesting that you mentioned children because there are some things where I've got 110 and 17, and my little boy will sit and if I let him, will play with the iPad, and almost kind of there's something that's kind of CBBC on in the background, and he'll find the app for that and play along. So that's kind of second thing. But if you put him in front of say a Pixar movie, you can't even wave the iPad under his nose because he's absolutely transfixed. So that there has to be I think we're at the process of discovering what are the kind of genres that work with second screen or tablet devices or whatever. What are and then what do we do? And because the thing around buying stuff or getting additional facts or being able to comment, it's just plumbing. It's an engineering problem. The psychology and the business model, those are the hard parts to crack.
It's not unlike a few years ago when every television program had to have a website.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I mean, that's just gone, thankfully, because it was all a bit pointless. I mean, there are some instances that a television program should have a web presence, but it's not for everything. I mean,
Well, so, I mean, there is this sort of concept of we're not delivering just a TV program anymore. We're delivering an end-to-end experience, whatever the hell that should mean.
I like TV programs, beginning, middle, and end.
Well, that's and I think you're right, and so do I. But maybe the kind of the beginning, the middle, and the end start at different places because how often you look at how much money there is in things like the audiobooks for kind of those most loved wobbly shows like Blake Seven, where people actually want to they love the beginning, middle, and the end of the stories, but they cared enough about the characters to try and understand what was what happened in their lives, in their fictional lives. Apart from that, so maybe that's the power of the tool.
Yeah. I mean, you look at the two things. We run our our remote approvals site, and so someone made some comment on one of our websites saying, "What's the point in broadcasters anymore? We might as well just give everyone my Fred password, and they'll go in and find everything just before it's been broadcast at whatever previous state it was." Yeah. And of course, then the extension from that is you look at Interplay Central. Just give everyone your Interplay Central, and they can make the program themselves.
Yeah.
Just log on and cut their own.
So we did a for the not the cloud DPP report the one before that, the sort of the creative revolution one. We had a couple of fascinating sessions with the with one of the broadcasters with their technical arm in the room, and I've never very traditional program maker, very good guy actually running the session, and then one of his tech guys said, I don't like this program stuff. Why can't you just put the footage online and I'll make my own program? And there was a little bit of a gap of understanding between the two. That
idea that there are times to be passive, and that's when a schedule is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. It's really nice when you get home to go, what's on? Entertain me.
Yeah.
And if you didn't have a schedule, you'd be trying to work out what, or you'd be relying on a recommendation. Now, a schedule is only a recommendation for you, isn't it? It's just it's a recommendation to a mass, rather than actually going onto your Twitter feed and saying, "Oh, look, John's watching that. I'd really like to see that."
Quite fancy watching that. Yeah,
which is
and that's that's
metadata in it.
Yeah,
as well.
exactly. You can circling right back to the point where actually something like Twitter is metadata because it serves. It's disconnected from the production metadata, but it's actually serving as a piece of metadata which is guiding you towards doing something you weren't going to do, which is watching telly.
Yeah. Go on, then wrap that up.
Well, I mean, a big channel. I mean, I think obviously the key is we've obviously clearly stated. At the shoot is when we need to define where our production is going. We need to understand the reality where that's going. We need to be logging metadata, but as a tag format, I think is very important. I mean, there are no standards, but obviously the idea of a GPS signal means that database link can actually define everything that's going on in that area. So there's obviously lots of information opportunities there. I mean, we did a technology recently where we actually scanned RSS news feeds and linked them into an archive database, which then linked into a billing system. So suddenly we saw an increased level of activity. For example, Michael Jackson died, and we had archive footage of Michael Jackson. We increased the price of our archive, and we watched and tagged that, and that was completely automated. It was very interesting.
Was that real? Or just
that's real. That was a real scenario.
Yeah.
And we increased the price of the billing of that archive library because the tagging on the RSS feed was increasing. Cynical. So, I mean, that's the reality of tagging that can go on.
And did you actually do that?
We actually did that live.
It was a
demonstration.
Yeah, oh, sorry, I thought you
we didn't actually say. I think they did put the price up, but they did it manually. But but the reality is that wealth of metadata is available to link into this. I think tagging was very key on those things. But the reality is the monetization. We recognise very in the early days, we are now getting a lot of productions that when they go into a shoot and they've got all these actors and this amazing set, etc., they think, okay, I'm not just going to shoot for my production. There's actually an opportunity to shoot for some archive opportunity or library footage here, and they're actually starting to think a little bit about that. But the reality is, without seeing that future monetary benefit of where that's going to go, that's not happening at the moment. So really what we then extend ourselves right to the other end of the side is, where is that second screen? And I think we're struggling with that as a thought this moment. Well, I think I agree with you. I think it's that it's not a second screen. Actually, it's pretty much replacing the first screen. Yeah. And certainly, my children, their life is completely on their laptops or their iPads. They're not in the front room watching TV with the family. They're interacting.
They must watch a big screen occasionally.
They watch the big screen. They probably want to catch up on X Factor final or something like that. But yeah, I mean, certainly we looked at this again. We were talking about this last night. I actually can't remember the last time I watched a live broadcast. It was all time shift on those things. But
anybody here? Do people watch live television? Sporting events or appointment of you stuff?
If you're on Twitter, it's going to ruin it if you don't watch it. So with big events.
Okay, so you consume it like that. So yeah,
absolutely.
We are in the train station, so it worked out very well.
So on Bake Off, so you are one of these people that when you watch Bake Off, you tweet along and follow Twitter feeds.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
millions. No, I just find it's fascinating. Yeah.
I mean, things like The Apprentice. If you're on Twitter and you're not watching The Apprentice live, it's going to be ruined.
Yeah.
I was a big fan of Breaking Bad, and I ended up having to subscribe to Netflix because I was getting it from friends on
so
DVD,
nobody else spoiled it
and
for you.
I knew it was going to be ruined because I'm on Twitter so much. So I ended up subscribing to Netflix so I could watch it live.
But it wasn't made available live on Netflix. It was Netflix is a streaming service. It's not broadcast.
The last series
was made available from a point, wasn't it? And did everyone?
But so
You
many
know,
of
go
my
and
you
friends
try
weren't
and
watch
watching
watch
at
it.
1 o'clock in the
Yeah.
bloody morning on
Yeah,
Monday
I think
morning.
as long as you watched it within a
Within
couple
eight,
of days.
you could
Yeah.
still, and the Twitter was sort
Yeah.
of relevant.
I think
yeah.
there's still a lot of event TV,
Yeah.
and certainly, I mean, I don't watch X Factor, but my feed just gets full of X Factor stuff. So I think if you
watch it.
didn't watch
I've
it,
heard it's quite good.
you,
Really?
so
Yeah.
I think there is certain TV that with social media you do need to watch it at the time.
So they've again the schedule is being enhanced by Twitter and being made
and
more
Facebook
relevant
as well
by
to
the
an
social
extent,
media
yeah.
content.
So synchronizing the social event and then interacting socially through your second screen.
So
Yeah.
there are now two groups of people out there. One is now thinking, I wonder if I could do a thing which would block all kind of live TV, Twitter things out of your feed for a particular period of time. And then there's another group of potentially broadcasters thinking, I wonder if we put live tweets of all of our programs on, we could get people back watching telly again.
Yeah.
Interesting. Go ahead.
I think it's people
watching
driving
telly.
it.
Yeah.
It's people driving it. I think does the hashtag at the beginning of a TV show, does that make you go to the hashtag, the concept that there's a hashtag there, or if there wasn't one, would you start one? Yeah. Yeah. So I mean that's been going for 5 years or 3 years. This is social. This is just happening. That's not. I don't think it's been driven by anybody in particular. Well, you're going to ask the question: why is Twitter worth any money at all? I don't know. Does it have a value? Probably doesn't have a value. It's a shared experience. Yeah. It's the water cooler. It's the water cooler moment.
It's a way of talking to people without ever talking to people.
Yeah. It's just a chat. It's chatting, isn't it? It's like it's a social experience like of watching television with your family, where we've all watched Gogglebox, haven't we? It's fantastic. You sit and watch. It's fantastic. Yeah. But it's just a shared experience. I don't think that a value. That nobody is reaping any value from that. Twitter, and there's all this conversation now. How are they going to ever make any money? It's value. I know, it's wonderful. Yeah. Must be it's fantastic, that, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, that's great. That is brilliant. But does it have that title of this one was monetary value? And I'm at a loss, really. I think
we've actually just discovered. We've just discovered some valuable metadata.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think that's been really interesting. So, sorry, we're going to have to draw this to a close because we're running out of our time. But I think really what we've discovered throughout this, the technology and the ability to do all this is available. The discipline and the commercial reality isn't at this moment in time. And I think we need that driver really to move this forward. But it's very interesting, the Twitter for even that social experience. And I think that's going to be a very important element to the second screen. And the fact we can unite people together. And again, interesting that linking that into a synchronized program event is very interesting as a thought process. But interesting debate. I want to say thank you very much to Dave and to Steve. And thanks for spending your first start of the day.
Just had a fab idea about
You've
Twitter.
oh, well done.
Metadata.
Twitter.
I'm going to go and make it.
Okay, well, watch your space. Okay, thank you, everyone. Cheers.